Welcome to Overtime. Here's our panel. He's a contributing writer at The Atlantic and producer of the documentary Fooding 2, Eric Schlosser. He's a New York Post columnist and author of The War in the West, Douglas Murray, and he's a New York Times contributing writer whose new book is The Age of Grievance, Frank Bruni. All right, guys, here are the questions. What are the panel's thoughts on a Virginia school board restoring Confederate names? Oh, yeah, I saw this today. The schools there, 2 schools in Virginia restoring, I think the Stonewall Jackson is getting his name back on the school. Didn't see that coming. Is it a sign of backlash to DEI? Yeah.
All right, here we are today on Real Time with Bill Maher, and he has a few guests, including Englishman Douglas Murray, for whom I have quite a bit of respect. Can't say I agree with him on everything, but generally, you know, in the UK or in Europe, where I live, in my unnamed Western European country, he would be considered a right-winger. Whereas in America, he's probably just more, you know, middle of the road. But, so you just heard the question, the first question on Bill Maher today. There's 2 interesting questions we're going to take a look at. The first one is about some schools in Virginia that are renaming their schools back to what they were after they were named after Confederate generals like Stonewall Jackson. And let's see what the panel has to say, and then I'll jump in with my heterodox take.
Yeah, I mean, it's a backlash thing. It is. And always, this country never knows where to stop in the middle. It just never can find, it's like the thing that goes boom, ba boom, ba bing, that people have on their desk.
A pendulum?
That steel balls.
Oh, okay.
You know, the steel balls. Anyway.
Apparently that's called a Newton's cradle, I think. They were big in the 70s. Everyone had one on their desk.
So what do you think about it, panel?
It's slightly dangerous terrain, but I can throw one thought out. I looked into this some years ago when the statues started coming down in 2020. And there are some places where I think there was like very weird overreach, and I can understand some places where some locals might have like got resentful about that. If you go to Monument Avenue in Richmond, there are no monuments. It's just an avenue with a lot of like stone bases on which you could put a statue at some point, but there aren't. If you're into plinths, it's a great place. It's a lovely place. And in fact, the only statue that is still there is, what's his name, Arthur Ashe, the tennis player.
Arthur Ashe?
Yeah, so there's a big statue of him. It's the only one still standing. And he's got a child kneeling there with a book, and he's got the tennis racket up. And unfortunately, it looks like he's about to beat the child. but it's just...
Yeah, I actually visited Richmond quite a few years ago now. When was it? It was before the statues came down, because I saw the statues. One of my daughters went to university there. Did a 4-year degree there. And I didn't really pay much attention at the time. I was just helping her move into her dorm and all that. But, yeah, I had no idea they had all been taken down, apart from a statue of Arthur Ashe, a tennis player. Fantastic.
Yeah, but I can... My point is, I can understand if I were a local, I might have got a bit annoyed about this. Yeah.
But I think it's worth remembering that the Confederacy celebrated slave owning. And these statues weren't built during the Confederacy. Sure. They were built when the Jim Crow laws were being enforced and segregation was really being enforced. So I think we need to know our history and honor our history, but I can understand how it would be tough to live in a town that is celebrating people who really thought that slavery was a great thing.
Well, everybody thought that, by the way. I mean, I agree. Now, first of all, to re-put the statue up?
No,
that's
sure.
great. I mean,
But you can do what museums call retain and explain. I mean, you say we need to know our history. How are people going to know their history if there's no statues representing anything that happened except for one side? I mean, in most countries, like France, for instance, France said in 2020, the president himself said, we will take down no statues, we need to know all of our history. And that's
In
to
the Soviet
explain
Union,
it.
should they have kept the statues of Marx and Lenin
Well, of course,
up
there are places.
after
Yes,
Russia became a republic?
They did. I've been to them. There are lots of the former Soviet republics put all the statues in a park, for instance, where you could then go
Or
to
a
look at them. And
museum.
that's
A
one
museum
way.
would
Yeah.
be great.
Right, it is.
But a lot of the statues we're talking about are not explanations, they're venerations,
Sure,
they're
yeah, yeah.
celebrations.
Exactly.
And if they're celebrating, as you just spoke so eloquently to, if they're celebrating things like slavery and the Confederacy, then I think it's worth having a conversation about whether they belong.
And they were traitors.
Yeah, well, this brings up all sorts of issues, doesn't it? Basically, yeah, what did I learn about the Confederacy at school? So I was in school in the 70s, graduated high school in the 80s in the United States, and we learned very little about the Civil War, to be honest. Yeah, the basic things they teach kids, I guess back then was, the South is bad because they were in favor of slavery. Now, of course, it wasn't a war about slavery, and it was, I suppose the Civil War was the first time, or the result of the Civil War was that was when America first became an empire. It was an internal empire. The North imposed its will through force on the South. In my view, they should have just let the South secede. If they wanted to go, it's like having a divorce. If somebody wants to divorce you, you can try to get them to stay, but if they don't really want to, if they really don't want to stay, what's the point of forcing them? It just seems pointless. But of course, there was a lot more to it than that. And yes, one of the issues was the right to own slaves and all that. But to say that the statues of Civil War generals are, the generals themselves, they weren't so passionate about slavery that they wanted to fight. They basically wanted to keep their way of life. They wanted a separate country. And the whole thing's not about slavery at all, really. But I'm sure, I'm no Civil War historian, obviously. Maybe some of you can give some more information in the comments. And as Bill Maher just pointed out, as an aside there, slavery has existed forever. It's been part of humanity since the dawn of time. In all civilizations, nobody invented it. It's just been the way things have been. And it is modern, white people, if you like, mainly driven by the British Empire, that has banned slavery or eradicated slavery in the Western world. And where does slavery still persist today? In Africa.
And they were traitors.
They were traitors. This was a war against a secessionist.
Yeah, but people.
Secessionists aren't traitors. That's not the same thing. They wanted to leave the Union. They weren't trying to overturn the Union.
Also have to remember, look, there are obviously cases like that, where, like Stonewall Jackson, I don't think you particularly need to have a school named after. But, don't forget in 2020, this rampage went all the way through to any high school named after Thomas Jefferson.
Right.
Well, so there's a logic,
Right.
and it can get out of hand. But
And it got out of hand very fast.
You were talking about what might happen with the Trump administration. I hope that we're not going to have in Monument Valley the January 6th insurrectionists and what was the guy with the horns? Statues of those rebels.
I could see
But
it.
he will get them out of jail.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
He will pardon them.
But, again,
So what? Maybe a lot of them do need to be pardoned. Again, no legal expert. It will be interesting to see what happens with the January 6 protesters who have been jailed for many, many years.
and on this slavery thing, don't put up statues of traitors who supported slavery, but also teach kids the truth.
Yeah.
Slavery was a horrible thing that everybody in the world did, including people of color in other parts of the world. It's all through the Bible. Every civilization did it. They didn't even think it was wrong. There's no laws against it in the Bible. There's a lot of laws about it, and nobody ever goes, oh, maybe we should just not do it.
Yeah, of course. It wasn't a sin. It was just part of being human back then and throughout humanity.
Never crossed their mind.
Right.
Again, teach the whole story would be my
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely.
Okay. So, because, should cities employ safe use sites to combat the drug epidemic and help addicts? Well, Portland just pulled back on that.
Oh, ho, ho. Well, they just mentioned my hometown. I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. And It's been a long time since I've lived there. I left the United States in 1988, so and that was after having finished university. So the last time I really lived in Portland was 1983 when I finished high school. But yeah, Portland has played with all these these permissive drug policies over the years, and it's been a disaster. You know, you get more of whatever you tolerate, and Portland has got a lot more of all that shit it tolerated.
I think it was Portland, or maybe it was San Francisco, maybe, but they had that, you know, let's give out free drugs, see what happens. I think it's a great idea, but I'm not an addict.
Yeah,
You know, addicts, you know, to them, they were just like, great, more drugs.
yeah.
I mean, it didn't seem to work.
I just did a document on the fentanyl crisis recently. I went to some of these safe use sites, and there's so many problems about it, because on the one hand, there's a very good, you know, idea. It's a compassionate idea that you give users a facility where they can shoot up with needles that are clean, and there's Narcan in case they overdose, and this brings them back round. And it's certainly, you know, in that way, it's understandable.
It's not understandable at all. It's just nonsense. You you provide a place where drug addicts can do their drugs. You give them all the means to do the drugs, clean needles, because you're so compassionate. And then they have Narcan there in case these drug addicts overdose. You can spend more resources, time, money to you know, save them from their overdose. No, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and this has nothing to do with being compassionate. What about being compassionate to society as a whole? Instead of shitifying your entire society, which is not very compassionate to them, you know, you find another solution to drug addicts. And basically, I suppose when I was young, they just were moved along, or they were kept in a very tightly constrained part of the city and not allowed to just loiter and set up encampments and shoot up all over the place.
The bit that's the problem is like 10 blocks around any safe use site is covered with needles and people trying to sell you fentanyl. So you have to weigh them up.
Okay. How does our tiered economy, this is for you, Frank.
All right, so there we go. 2 interesting questions on the Real Time with Bill Maher show. And Douglas Murray, like I said, I often agree with him, but obviously not on everything. Let me know what you guys think about those 2 issues in the comments. And do make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. I recently went over 2,000 subscribers, by the way, so thank you very much. It would be great to get that up. The next goal, 10,000. We'll see. Anyway, thanks, guys, and we'll see you soon in another video.